the wonderful things, and I was comfortable with it. Right, started the session this morning, watching. So
yes,
thank you, Sam.
Mike. And thank you for the reminder, Michael. I was going to get that. So we are recording in case you need to come back and watch this. So thank you so much. We have such a good crowd here this morning to hear Sam and Sue speak about budget basics. I will be here to monitor the chat box. If you have any questions, you guys remember all the housekeeping, go see our vendors. You're going to get your sketch form tomorrow, so don't worry. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will make sure they get answered. But I just really want to thank Sam and Sue for taking the time to come here. I know that Romulus has worked very closely with both of you. Sam, you are always so helpful with these 23 plus invoices in particular. And Sue, anytime I have had any questions about WIOA, I am telling you, you respond to emails faster than I think anybody I've ever met in my life. So I just want to say how wonderful it is to work with you guys, how helpful you have always been with any of our budget questions. I am very excited to see what you have in store for us.
Thanks, Renee.
Of course.
Yes, thank you. Well, all righty, everyone. As I understand, there's people who are attending this conference that have every level of expertise from just starting to being around for a few years. So we're going to try to start from the basics of some of the stuff you may hear of already, but it's always good to get refreshers on everything, I think. So again, I'm Sam Yankerberg with Leo, Office of Adult Education. And I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself too soon.
Hi, and I'm Sue Mazzello. I'm with the Office of Adult Education also. I work on the WIOA side of the funds, or the WIOA funds. And Sam, of course, works with the 107 program.
Let's see if I can, there we go. All right, so there's just kind of 3 quick objectives that we like to make sure that we're getting through. So in general, what are budgets? Why are they important? And then some tools that will hopefully give you some assistance that are, if you go in the WHOOVA app, they're downloaded in this section on the 3 different three different documents that are in there. So what are the budgets? So budgets are your tool to put together the limited amount of funding that you get for adult education, so that way we can ensure that what we're doing fits your priorities and make sure that what we're doing is allowable. With the 107 and WIOA, who completes those budgets? So that should be a partnership that you're doing between your adult ed department as well as with your financial staff. You both have your own expertise and you both should be part of this process to be able to make sure that everything's accountable and ready for an audit or a monitoring visit in the future to make sure everything has those documentations available. And then also, do you have a cost allocation plan? So for everyone that gets multiple funding sources, is there a way that you document which one and why things go under the 107 or under the WIOA? And also to make sure that we're not doing anything with supplanting with funds and stuff that violate certain federal requirements. And so those are key elements that we need to make sure that we have and we're keeping intact. When you do submit your budget, that is giving the state the knowledge that you have done this partnership with your budget office and with yourself to make sure that you are working together excuse me, with those partners to make sure that you do have this budget prepared. As it says, you have the audit trail and accountability of what it is that you're doing. Because obviously, when you go through the whole budget process and you get to the end of it, your finance department are the ones that's going to document your expenditures and make sure what you actually did goes into your budget and aligns at the end of the funding year to make sure that you have those final expenditure reports completed. So that partnership across the board helps. So that way during the year, if you do have to amend your budgets or do any of that type of stuff, then your budget people and as well as your adult ed people are on that same course and same framework. So why do we complete the budgets? So obviously we need to make sure the costs are allowable, reasonable, allocable, necessary, legal under the federal and state laws, and meet the performance of the grant. So these are all the things that when we're looking at your budgets, when they're submitted, this is what we're looking at to make sure that it fits all the requirements that we are given, whether it's federal documentation or state documentation from legislature or federal laws, that this is what it is that we're looking for, and what you're doing is okay and related to the adult education funds to make sure that you can proceed with your program and get things done. So there's kind of different elements that go into each one of them. And so your basic functions of your adult ed are you're providing instruction. So you've got 131, 132 costs for your instructors or for your tutors or those types of things. You've got participant support. So maybe you have navigators or something that are there helping your participants to get through their journey of adult ed and into secondary education. Your instructional staff support. So maybe you have your admin staff or something that's helping with that, or you have other types of tutors and stuff that are helping. Your general admission or administration. So your people that are running your functions with adult education, your directors and those types of things. Again, your business services. So your budget staff that's in there paying for your expenditures that are coming through, tracking your finances to make sure what it is that you're doing, you're not overspent on your budget, or you're making amendments based on what the actual cost or costs come through if they weren't on the estimates that you were expecting. Your operation and maintenance. So are you in a school building? Are you renting a facility? Do you have rent charges? Do you have IFA costs? Different types of things that are in there that you guys do, and then transportation, whether it's providing reducing a barrier that you're providing gas cards maybe to participants to be able to get to and from your educational activities, or maybe you're going to Michigan Works to provide stuff, or going on college visits to try to get them to that next level and know what it is that they want to do. And then there's object codes that these fall under. You've got your salary and benefits, you've got your purchase services, your supplies and material, capital outlay, and sometimes there is other, but that one doesn't come into play. And capital outlay would only be something that would come into play if you're looking with Section 107 funding on that. All your object codes on this next one, your function code list, are based off of MDE and actually federal rules for the code. So for all your business people, they understand the function codes in your school department, but the function codes that are here for WIOA and for Section 107 are an excerpt of it. They're not everything, but they're part of your application to say when you're in Nexus, and we will discuss that elephant in the room later. But when you're in Nexus and you are putting in your budgets, there's a drop down that gives just your function codes that are allowable under whatever funding that you're using. So Section 107 does have a few more out there than what WIOA does, but they're based off of MDE's accounting manual, which you can go on MDE's website. It gives the definitions of all of them. It also gives the object codes that are allowable under each one of them. So that's a helpful tool that your business people most likely know, but maybe your adult ed staff don't have that activity to go in there and look at that. So it's a tool that you can use when you're doing the budgets to make sure that what it is that you're asking for is properly aligning. And if you can't find something, then that's when you can contact Sue or myself, and we can kind of guide you down the right path of what it is that you need to do. The other thing that the function code list does provide is your administrative functions. So with WIOA, you have the 5% cap. And so that helps you see which function codes that you're doing and which activities you're doing are classified as administrative functions. And so that makes sure that you're utilizing your budget appropriately and not exceeding those funds, to make sure that you know where you're allocating those costs appropriately to. Now, the other key with this, with why we're looking at budgets, is to make sure your costs are allocable. So the funding is meant for federal and state to be 100% for adult education. So there are programs that offer both alternative ed, maybe community ed, maybe your adult ed director is also an assistant principal. So the activities and costs that are being identified in your Section 107 budget and your WIOA budgets need to be allocable for adult ed only. And if for whatever reason they're not, then you need to adjust those percentages. So if your adult ed director is 50% adult ed and 50% community ed, then you would obviously only put 50% of that person's salary into the 107 or WIOA budgets, and the rest would come out of whatever funding source you would have for your community ed stuff. So then, as a reminder, we'll say that the Section 107 is your primary funding source. And so WIOA is your supplemental one. With that, we have associated costs that go with your grants. And so sometimes you're going to have supplies that go with your director, or supplies that go with your teacher or whatever. And so we'll give you an example here that paying the salary of an adult ed navigator out of 107, then this navigator's cell phone should be paid for out of Section 107 also. That being said, if we're looking at the budgets, and because Sue does WIOA and I do Section 107, and we do assist each other if needed, if backups come into play and everything, so we both have an understanding of both programs. But generally speaking, we're looking at only our funding sources that we've got primary responsibility for. And so if you had your navigator in your WIOA application, and then you put your cell phone in your Section 107 for the navigator, while I'm looking through the Section 107 budget, I see no navigator costs. So then that raises flags up to say, okay, is there actually an adult ed navigator? Where are they funded from? Or are they just your regular navigator for your school system, and they accidentally got the cell phone put into the adult ed budget? So it brings up more questions when you're putting costs that are tied to one specific individual in both budgets and not identifying where that is. Obviously, both funds are limited, so there's times where you might have costs in both budgets or similar costs like this. But it's helpful to have a note that said something. If the scenario was you had a navigator paid out of the WIOA funds and the navigator cell phone out of 107, you could say that it's the navigator cell phone, and in parentheses, the navigator's paid with WIOA funding. So at least we have an understanding and know that this is actually allocable to the adult ed charges, and be able to go forward with that. Now, the next portion of what your budgets are is to start your budget line after you picked your function code, and it's your description. So your descriptions need to be transparent. We need to know what it is that you're spending the money on, how it's being spent, and why it's being spent. So again, this is ensuring the costs are allocable towards adult education. So what should your description include? So you have the cost. So if you're paying for teachers, we need to know what it is. So you've got teacher salaries that are in there, the activities to doing. So what are they doing? They're instructing your participants. And then how is it related to adult ed? Well, now you're hiring teachers, or you're purchase servicing for teachers. They're providing instruction, and they're providing instruction for ADE. Now we know what it is, we know what activity they're doing, and we know how it's related to adult education. So those are the ways that we're looking to make sure that we're doing it. Now, your budget description does not have to be all inclusive. It doesn't have to show every minute detail of everything, because your whole budget line paints your picture. So you start with your function code. That's going to give us the idea, and you the idea of what costs are related. So if you're in section or function code 131, 132, we know it's going to be something related with the instruction of adult education. Whether it's instructing costs, whether it's supplies costs, it's something related to the adult education instruction activity. Then you go to your budget description, and that budget description now tells us what the costs are that you're looking to purchase. And so it gives us that idea of what it is that you're paying for out of that function code that's was chosen. Then you go to FTE and hours. So if you do have instructors, you're going to have an FTE and hours column completed. And that'll tell us whether or not you have one full-time person, two full-time person, or if you're paying your people by the hours, and now you have 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours or what may have it. Then your salary and benefits, which are what you're paying them. If you're hiring them from EduStaff or something, then you would have a purchase service that they were being funded out of. If this was a supplies line item under those function codes, then you would have supplies and material that were there. So by each one of those different areas that are on your budget line, that whole budget line is painting the whole picture. So you don't need to have every little minute detail in it in your description, but you do have to show enough that makes us understand what it is that's going on and how your description is going to make sure it fits with the adult ed rules and everything. So we're going to give you some examples here to show you kind of what good, bad things can happen and how I'm trying to illustrate that whole picture for you. So when you're the top one here, which is a budget detail that's lacking information, all it says is that we're doing contracted teachers. So assuming this would be under function code 131 or 132, but we don't know how it relates to adult education. We don't know how many are being going to be part of this because there's no FTE and hours column completed. So a better description that provides us with the information that we're looking for to help paint that picture would be that we've got EduStaff providing teachers for ABE instruction. So we now know what's being done, what cost is being asked for, what activity they're doing, and how it's related to adult education. Now you go to the next level, where now helping to paint that picture, we have the FTE hours column, and that says 3. So now we know that we're contracting with 3 teachers from EduStaff to provide adult education instruction in the ABE area. So if we would show the whole budget line here, we would see that then this would be under purchase services because we're contracting this through EduStaff. So this shows you kind of the level of detail. Now, when we change the picture a little bit and change that story that we're telling, now we have the same budget description of providing, EduStaff is providing teachers for AB instruction, but now we've changed the hours. Now we have 6,580 hours. Well, obviously that's not one teacher, or they're working 24 hours, 5 days a week. And we know that's hopefully not happening. So because of this, now we need to change our description to paint that picture better of what it is that we're asking for. So now we're saying that we're providing 10 teachers for AB instruction. Now we can correlate that the 6,580 hours is related to 10 teachers and not 1. So this also helps when you get audited or have a monitoring visit, and that comes into play where now we're out there looking and we know what it is that we're looking for. An auditor knows what it is that we're looking for to see how this budget line equates when we're looking into your general ledgers of your accounting system to know what it is that's there and what's needed. So another description is director. As I said earlier, some programs have just an adult ed director. Sometimes they're got multiple different roles with maybe community ed, alternative ed, assistant principal, or something else. And so again, to paint that picture of what it is that they're doing, it's the adult ed director. Now we know that our costs are allocable to adult ed. And the activity is they're supervising teachers and providing guidance for the adult ed program. The FTE column says it's half FTE. Now, obviously, this doesn't tell us if they're also the community ed director, but we're saying that we're funding a half a position out of adult ed, and the description is allocable to the adult ed program, so we know that what it is that we're doing is relevant to adult education. So just those simple little added differences. And the challenge that I always tell people is when you're completing the budget, and I do it myself, so it's not, I'm not saying this against anybody. You know so much about what it is that they're doing that sometimes you forget that the detail's not there to tell the person who's reviewing this, or to tell the auditor that's reviewing it, because say 10 years I'm not here, 10 years Stu's not here, and we got new people, and for whatever reason an auditor picks up this program to look at, they don't know what's going on. And so we're trying to help illustrate that picture for future people that are also looking at it. But it's also when we're reviewing the budget at our Office of Adult Ed for the state's office, so that we understand the picture that you're trying to display to us. So that's where this extra information comes into play. So if you can have that thought a little bit when you're going through it and go, okay, does this make sense to somebody who doesn't know what our situation is here at Clare Adult Education? It's clear when we provide that little extra level of detail so that we know what's going on.
Hey, Sam, this is Sue. Can I just throw one thing in there?
Absolutely.
On the slide before, sorry to interrupt, you discussed teachers. Important detail would be to include the program type of whatever the teacher is. Sam has ABE in that slide, and that's great to know. We can tell by a function code, as Sam mentioned, 131 or 132 is a good idea, whether it's ABE, high school completion, et cetera, except for some of the detail that we looked for based on an audit or a monitoring that we had was, let's say that your program offering screen doesn't say that you offer ABE or high school completion, yet in the budget part of it, it's detailed that it's an ABE teacher. Then our question would come, why is there an ABE teacher if it's not selected as a program, right? It may have to do with the level based on the assessments and the students that are coming in. A bigger question was ESL that we had before. Maybe it said ESL teacher in the description, but it wasn't selected in the program offering. So we do look at those without having to add too much information. That's a good suggestion, and Sam provided that there. Thanks, Sam.
Yep, and thank you for that reminder, Sue. And so as Sue stated, we're not only looking at your budget lines that you put in there, we are also looking at other areas of your application that you submit. So all the detail in your application helps paint that overall picture of what it is that we're doing. And so that's why each key area is important to have that detail, so that way when we do look at the whole, we know that we've got a Picasso here that we're looking at, and we're not just looking at all these little pixels that are out of place and don't know what's going on with it. So we go to supplies, and supplies is one of the ones that can be frustrating, but we do need to know the detail of what it is that you're purchasing. We can't have too much detail that you don't need to do. And so with that being said, so with some of them, and if we go back to the teacher example a little bit, we might have the teacher's hours in it, the teacher's salary in it, the teacher's this, that, and we're going to get into amendment stuff. But if there's too much detail in it, then sometimes that makes it challenging when you go forward and do amendments and stuff, that it changes. Everything's got to change, and sometimes that puts burden on everybody to make sure things were done. But with supply specifically on this example, so because we need to know what the supplies are, just saying supplies and $1,800 doesn't give us the detail to know what it is that you're purchasing is actually allowable under the funding that we're doing. So if we say teacher supplies, that way we know that if for whatever reason this said teacher supplies and it was under function code 226, which would be administrative costs related to your adult ed director and admin staff and that type of stuff, that something's wrong. So we would see teacher supply and go, we've got the wrong function code right off the bat. So we would know, saying teacher supplies, we would see function code 131, 132. So that way it helps say what the activity is for, who's using this, what, to make sure that right off the bat your function code is the correct one that's being used. And so supplies, pens, pencils, 20 headphones, copy paper, that lets us know what you're doing. We don't need to say that you're buying one box of blue pens at $345 for that, a box of black pen for $345, a box of red pens for, we don't need to know all that minute detail, because that gets excessive when you're doing all that, especially when you are doing an amendment. Then now you're changing stuff, or when you actually went in and purchased it, now the price went up by 50 cents. Now you're changing your budget description to match stuff. And so that level of detail is not needed. We don't need to give yourself more work or give us more work or give your budget office more work to look at that type of stuff. So now we're going to move into the amendment side. And this is a lot, and depending on what size your screen is, it might be very small, and I apologize for that.
Sam, would it be okay if I asked a quick question? Do we
You
need
sure
to
can.
add prices, and the company we are buying from, my finance person said we need all of those details?
So when it like supplies and type like stuff like that, no, we don't need that level of detail. Obviously, if somebody on your side says you need that level of detail, it's not a hindrance on our side. But when it does come to amendments, then it causes challenges and makes sure that there's more information that's having to be updated, and more information that you're looking at, and more information we're looking at that might not be needed. So if you're putting in the dollar amount for everything, if you're putting in for your teachers that teacher A is going to work 15 hours a week for 30 weeks at $13 an hour, and now with COVID, you get shut down, and now they're not working 30 weeks, they're working 18 weeks. So your hours got adjusted, your wages probably went down, but then you forget to do your description. And so now your description's got to be updated because your description doesn't match the rest of that picture that your budget description's playing. So all that extra information that does that type of stuff causes an extra level of everybody looking, and more that has to be reviewed during amendment to make sure that now your dollar amount matches what your description dollar amount says, or your FTE and hours and your salary matches what your description says. And that's a lot of times one of the key areas that kick stuff back during amendments, is that there's so much in the description that now the rest of your budget line doesn't paint the same picture. Now you're telling two different stories with your description and your budget. And so now we're asking for those questions to make sure they match. So does that help, Renee? Okay, awesome.
Hey, Sam, this is Sue. I have one more
Yeah.
just input on that.
Definitely.
For assessments though, for like assessment tests and things like that, we do ask information. Under the WIOA grant, the federal guidance has determined only certain assessments are allowable. That would be the NRS approved, state approved assessments that we have. Certain levels or forms are approved as well. So 910 TABE is not, it's not on our list of approved assessments anymore. So we had a program that was using those last year, didn't indicate that. Our assumption was that they were using 1112. They had read the policy. They had not. They were using it. It couldn't be entered in mirrors, and it was inappropriate. It was inaccurate. It was inappropriate. They shouldn't have been using it. So we'd like to know that. Plus, and I'll let Sam speak quickly to the 107 funds, only the NRS assessments are allowable under that function code. The funds don't pay for like a college assessment. It doesn't pay for any other kind of other testing. We went through that a few years ago with the Fed, sent them multiple emails. No, only the NRS approved assessment. So for that, Renee, we would like to see if it's TABE. We would like to see if it's CASAS. We would like to see, the 1112, the CASAS-C, whatever it's going to be. You don't have to go so far with CASAS to go, whether it's listening or whether it's whatever. That's up to your program, what you choose to use. But we just need to make sure the type of assessment is allowable. Thanks.
Yep, and with assessments, we do ask for the assessments to be on separate lines so that we can track them and do that type of stuff.
Correct.
And you'll also see at the end of the cycle of your grant, there's the questions that ask about the GED area and stuff. And so, like Sue said, we can't spend that stuff under the federal grant. So on the Section 107 now, at the end of the year, we've got those questions that come along with your final expenditure report that's asking what your GED testing costs and that type of stuff are. So that way, when we're providing that information to the feds, we're extracting that information out to be able to do that. So there are caveats, I guess, on each function area and different things. And so everything's not just a pretty round hole that we can put stuff in. Sometimes we do have to play the little kid game, and make sure that we've got the shape that fits the hole. because it is different depending on the function code or the different based on the activity and that type of stuff. So there are nuances for each one. There is not just a simple answer necessarily for every single activity that we do to say that it's all watch across everything.
I agree, Sam, and I think that your last example where you showed FTE changing to the hours was a good example, because at that point we may ask the number of teachers. One of the other things I could say, Renee, just quickly, and I'll step away from this, is let's say in supplies, just basic supplies for students, they put pens and pencils, but the cost was $20,000. Then we would definitely come back and question it, because if you have 50 students or 80 students, why would any program spend 20,000? Was it a data entry error? Was it an error on giving us enough description? Because we're going to assume, is that reasonable? Would we spend 20,000 on pens and pencils for something like that? So that would be another thing where we don't need to know where you're purchasing it from unless the cost is unreasonable. And at that point, if you said, hey, each pen cost $20, then yes, we would have a comment about that back, about allowability. So as Sam said, one thing may lead to another that we may have questions about. Thanks. Sorry, Sam.
Oh, no, you're perfect. And so then if we switch to the amendment side, and again, I apologize if this is small on your screen, but the very top one is under function code 221. The approved budget says we have 2 ABE teachers to attend the 2020 Fall McKay Conference, $200 each for registration, and then $400 total is under purchase service. So then an amendment gets submitted, and for that amendment, now we've added to that budget description, and now it says 4 staff to attend the 2021 Spring McKay Conference. Well, we need to know in the description the staff and who that is, because function code 221 is for instructional staff, but function code 283 is for non-instructional staff. And so again, we're looking to make sure that we're allocating those costs appropriately to the correct function code, not only making sure it's allocable to adult education. So with that one, we're missing that. We're also missing, we see the budget line now went up $800. So we're missing the cost associated with the Spring McKay Conference. We don't know what it is. We just know our cost on our budget line just got increased by $800. And so those are 2 key components that get missed a lot. And so then when we resubmit the questions and say, okay, please identify your staff, please identify what costs are being paid for. Now we get it back, and hopefully it's inherent when you're doing it, so that we don't have to go back and forth and submit it. But so on the next one, on the approved submittal, we have under function code 221, we have the 2 ABE teachers to attend the Fall McKay Conference for $200 each for registration. And now we have 2 ABE and 1 HSE teacher to attend the Spring McKay Conference for $200 each, for now a total of $1,000. In the original submittal, we had 4 staff. Now breaking it out and identifying the staff, we realized there's 2 ABE teachers and 1 HSE, and now we have a new budget line under function code 283 that's for the adult ed director, because that was the 4 staff, and obviously they're non-instructional, so they fall under the 283 function code. And so it says 1 adult ed director to attend the 2001 Spring McKay Conference, $200 for registration, and then the $200 under purchase service. So that's where some of the detail is needed to make sure that we're allocating the costs appropriately, to make sure that where costs are being put is being put appropriately. So that's where, on the one example with teacher supply. So again, if it was under 226, we would expect it to be adult ed or director supplies or administrative supplies or something that would correlate to that function code that was chosen. And so when amendments come in, that's where a lot of the things come into play, where we're missing what that added dollar amount was, that and where it's going. And a lot of times conferences and that type of stuff is what gets amended, because obviously you don't know at the beginning of the year when you're completing your budget and filling that stuff out where anything's at. So you're going to say that throughout the course of the year, we're planning on sending our adult education teachers to adult education related conferences for provided by McKay, provided by Leo's Office of Adult Education. And then throughout the year when we find more information, we'll provide those updated budgets in an amendment. So that's what your first one might say now. Amendment, you submit an amendment in January. Now you're going to update that line, and now you know specifically that you're going to send people to the Spring McKay conference. So now you can specifically identify the Spring McKay conference, the costs that go to it, and then you would go to, and say if your budget line was for $2,000 and the McKay conference was only going to cost $1,000, you would still have part of your budget line say that we anticipate our adult ed teachers to go to more adult ed related conferences put on by Leo and adult ed staff, and you'd have that $1,000 that's left over associated with that part of the description until you knew what it is, and then you would submit an amendment so you could get that pre-approval to go to those conferences and stuff. So those are the types of things that we find in those amendments that kind of make things get questioned and get stuff sent back. And so that's the biggest thing that we try to educate with these types of things and the documents I'll talk about here in a moment, to make sure that we can prevent as much of that back and forth as possible. Everybody's, as far as the 107 side of the house, everybody's part of a region. Their regional fiscal agents have a policy of how to ask questions, whether they go through them, whether you go direct to us via email, and they'll send it to us, or you can send it to us and CC them for questions and stuff. We're always open for questions. That helps to eliminate any of this back and forth that we wind up doing. And then again, like with the previous conversation about if you've got the hours in the budget description, the amount of dollars that the teacher makes, the weeks that they're working, and all that stuff, when you submit the amendment, you need to make sure that that's being adjusted based on whatever the rest of your budget line is kind of displaying. So on to the next three things, which there's three documents that are attached to this in Wahoo, or however you pronounce this app that we're using. And so one of them is a budget development job aid that was created, and it's not created based on function codes. It's based on the activity. So it's based on transportation activity. It's based on supplies. It's based on technical equipment. It's based on teachers, because different types of costs might be eligible under multiple different function codes. And so rather than try to list stuff multiple times or figure that out, it's a job aid that's listed just by the activity. And so if you use that tool, that's providing you the information that we're looking for when we're looking at your budgets. So if you're doing something and you go, oh, that's on this job aid, let me see what it is that they're looking for. Just make sure you hit those points that are on it. Obviously, we can provide more information, but those are the key points that we're needing to make sure that what it is that you're doing fits all the rules and regulations that the adult ed world has to make sure that that budget line is allowable. And so it's not an inclusive list on this thing by any means. It can be updated every year. It could be updated during the year. If we saw issues that came up in a specific area constantly, we would update that document to go, okay, this is what it is that we're looking for because we've seen issues on it. Now we're going to update this document to give you guys a tool to help prevent that back and forth and everything. There's also two other examples on it. One, just budget examples, which some of which I provided here, but it gives you the whole budget line as the example to show you what's going on, but it gives you more of them. There's also one on supplies that gives you the good, the bad, the good, and the excessive, which has all the dollar amounts and the quantity of pens and all that type of stuff in it. So it gives you kind of the idea of the type of information that we need. You can look at the bad example to see, okay, what's missing. You can look at the excessive example to see, okay, I don't need to put that much information in there. So, and then also when it comes to your amendments, there's one for common amendment errors also. So that just tells you kind of the stuff that people add and then obviously forget to change or forget to mention when they're doing their amendment to provide that level of detail that we need to make sure it's not missing when you develop those amendments, so that way we can again prevent going back and forth and we can get budgets completed and reviewed and put into state funds available or grant funds available on a more timely effort. I'm going to switch to the next slide, but I'm going to mention quickly the elephant in the room that I spoke of before, which is the Nexus system. And we apologize for the delay that's associated with that. Obviously, we've switched from Megs Plus to now being told that we're moving to the Nexus system, and we are feverishly testing it and sending it back and testing it to try to make sure that we have the best application that we have possible. There will be stuff that we will live with that we know will not be necessarily the way we want to see it, and hopefully for the 22-23 program year, that application will be what it is that we're looking for. So we know that we are going to take some concessions on the current program that's going to be out there. We're trying to get it live as soon as we can for everybody. We know this presents a hardship for people, and so we're trying to get as much stuff done as possible to make sure that we can get this out there. It is very similar to Megs. However, the look of it is definitely different. There will be different things or different steps and different ways that you're going to do stuff on this one. As soon as we find or get it to go live or close to live, we will be providing training for everybody so that they know how to do it, to make sure the fiscal agents understand what their role is, and understand what the provider's roles are, for all the 6 different applications or 7 different applications that go through Nexus that will have that. So again, we're working feverishly on trying to make sure that we can get that for everybody. But it's a tight walk rope between the developer and Department of Education and ourselves to try to make this work for everybody. So we're open for any other questions that anybody might have that we can help with. But again, please download those 3 documents that are on this session. That will help you, and for WIOA staff, it'll help you provide your stuff. For Section 107 staff, it'll help you provide a little bit less stress maybe for your fiscal agents, because you'll maybe get less questions from them, and then we'll get less questions back to you. So hopefully that stuff helps. So, but does anybody have any questions? Except for Jason.
I've got one.
We can't hear you, Jason. You're off mute, but your mic's not working. Yeah, Chris.
Oh, okay. How you doing? I'm Chris.
Good.
You guys from Rochester. Great information. Appreciate you guys, and definitely always been helpful. Okay, so something new. Here's a scenario. Tell me what you think. There's a new cost that is allowable on both WIOA and 107. The business office says, well, let's split it up. It's better to have that cost on both than just on one. Based on what you said earlier, my hunch is that it's better to have it just on one. But that's my question. So
it can be split on both. There are some that put teachers on both Section 107 and WIOA, especially if it's a new cost that's coming into play. Then you don't have to worry about supplanting concerns, because you don't have one funding versus now you're splitting funds. But it is feasible. It is possible to do that. If your allocation plan does that with a lot of your costs, then you've already got that documented, and that's what your standard business practice is to do. So it's not out of the course to do. We do have that with some of them. So it's one of those things where when it comes up, it's probably something that's good to just have a conversation with, so that way Sue and I can talk to you and go, okay, this is what would be, based on what we're hearing you're saying, this is what best course of action would be to help prevent any monitoring and audit findings. So when you get those odd scenarios like that, it's better just to have that conversation to make sure that we're all on the same page, to make sure we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's. So.
Okay, great. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Were you going to try again, Jason?
Yeah, Sam, can you hear me now?
There you go. We got you.
Perfect. Thank you. Hey, I just want to say thanks for coming on and giving us this overview today. And I've got two questions. One's a clarifying question about the level of detail needed for supplies. And the second question is I want to ask you to repeat something because my audio had broken up. So if we can start with the supplies, and I want to go back to the example you had presented that showed pens, headphones, and copy paper. And just to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, if, say, this is in an instructional code, you know, an instructional function code, and it says that exact description that you had provided as the example, is that going to suffice? You'll be able to know that if we are buying copy paper in a 132 code, that it's for the classroom, and all those supplies are for the classroom, or does the description have to also indicate that these are classroom or administrative supplies?
So correct. So on that example, the start of it was teaching supplies. So I can get to it without going past it. So it was teaching supplies. So we do need to know the activities and make sure that it aligns with the function code that's chosen, because we know that sometimes you'll have, I mean, you might have an order and it's going to be split with the directors getting part of it and the classrooms getting part of it. But we try to make sure the costs are allocable to the function code and the activity that they're being used. So that's why we ask for it to say that teaching supplies, or if you're under 226, you would say supplies for the director for adult education or something, so we would know that the cost that you're asking for aligns with whatever that function code is that you're doing.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that if we submitted this exact description to you, it wouldn't get sent back asking how much were the headphones or how much papers being purchased, that this would be sufficient.
So, and again, it goes to what Sue's point was earlier. So if this budget line was $20,000, now we're going to ask more questions. So if the cost based on what it is that's in there looks reasonable to the dollar amount that's there, then it makes sense. If the dollar amount doesn't look reasonable for the costs that are there, now we're going to ask for some clarifying information to make sure. And that's where every situation can be different. And there's no fully right answer to say, if you do this, it'll get it through perfectly. It's all what paints that picture. And if the picture's blurry, then we're going to ask some clarifying questions to make sure that we get it into the right contrast to get it clear. So did you have something, Sue?
A follow-up to that is there any kind of a document out there that can point to what would be considered reasonable, or what are the metrics by which, when you're reviewing a document or reviewing a budget, that you say this looks unreasonable?
Well, so like what Sue said earlier about, we look at your program offering screen to see how many participants they're running. So if you've got a program that you're running 5 participants through the program and you've got $15,000 worth of supplies cost, something seems out of whack. Something's not right. So that's where your budget description isn't that only piece that paints that picture. It's the other parts of your application that paint that picture as well. And so we're using all of that to make sure the costs seem reasonable and allowable for the program. So there's not a one size fit all that's going to say this looks good. We do have to take into account that whole picture. And so if something just doesn't feel right, then it's like, okay, based on what you're doing and how many you're serving and what you're going through, something makes this budget line look off. And so that's where it's either an email, a phone call, or whatever is usually the best route, so we can get an understanding and paint that picture of what it is that you're doing and go, okay, if you say this, then that clarifies what it is and we'll be good with it. Or based on your description, just put a note in the file, and that way we know what it is that you're doing and we can move forward. So stuff like that to try to make it clear of that picture. So and I think Sue might have something to add to it.
Oh, unfortunately I always do. Sorry, Sam.
No, you're good.
Jason, when it comes to headphones, I mean, everything that Sam is talking about today, everything is dependent on another factor, right? So headphones are property. They may only cost $10. They may only cost $20, but they could cost $100. And there is a property guideline that MDE has put out, that we have it out there too. So let's say you put computers in there, computers, $40,000, Our question is going to be how many computers, how many laptops, how many screens. If you put copiers down, the question is. So to include the headphones, because one of the things that we're supposed to look at is your property inventory. And I agree with the fact that these could be under the $5,000 limit, but a supply can be in a piece of equipment dependent on what it is. Are we going to count the reams of paper? No. If the agency or the district says they're spending $20,000 on paper, yeah, we probably will. We'll ask for justification. But when we come to look at your records and we look at things like that, then the question is where are the headphones? Let's say you bought 100. Or the district bought 100 and they only have 5 when we're there. Well, where are the other 95? So if the state or federal funds are used to purchase something like that, then I would, yes, include that detail. And literally, not that we're trying to be too restrictive, but adding the number on there, like adding the 20 or adding the whatever, isn't really that. We're not trying to ask too much. Let me just put it that way by saying it. But do we need to know how many pens? No. So take into effect what the item is that you're purchasing. Same thing would go with assessment tests. If we saw $20,000 for table 11, 12, but the agency served 50 people, well, we understand that they'll be tested multiple times, but that's multiple years of assessment tests. Is that reasonable that you wouldn't have funds to purchase that within another year? So sometimes it's sitting back and looking at the activity and saying, okay, what are they? And we're asking for information based on federal and state guidelines. We're not asking information, because we think this is a good idea, because they in turn, when they were here for 2 years, asked us all these questions. So again, take it into, its perception of what the item is going to be. Copy paper, no, but depending on the value. And the example that Sam is showing at 1,800, not unreasonable, but we would want to see how many headphones, because we will check the property document when we're there. So thanks.
Okay, and if I may, I appreciate the comments and the answer. And if I can, Sam, if I can ask you to repeat something you had said at the beginning of your presentation about having supplies and salaries split between 2 different budgets. I thought I heard you say, and this to me just does not seem correct, so help me understand. If you have salaries in a 107 budget, you can charge the cell phone to WIOA as long as you put in the description that the salaries charged to 107?
So you should keep everything together as much as possible because it's relevant to that cost. So now if your WIOA funds, and so this is where you got to be careful with the planning too. To say if this is something that you've always done out of 107 and now you throw it to the federal grant, now you're looking at a questionable of supplanting and stuff. So if your standard practice is having stuff in section 107, which is your primary funding, and then you're trying to move it to WIOA, you can get yourself in the trouble with an audit or a monitoring of potentially having question costs, which we never want to go down. And that's where that allocation plan comes into play so much to know what your standard business practice is of how you're divvying up and splitting costs between WIOA and section 107. That was just trying to explain how if you are splitting costs, we need to understand what it is. And so if the picture of the budget doesn't make sense because you don't have navigator costs in your budget, but you have supplies or something for your navigator, then we need to understand where that navigator is being funded from. Because there are times where we'll have stuff in the budget and that person has nothing to do with adult education. And so then we have to pull those costs out of the budget because the person that has it in there isn't related to adult ed. And so those costs aren't allocable to adult ed, so we have to remove them. Hopefully that wasn't a spinning circle and that made sense.
Well, I just, I get it. I had thought I heard you say that we could do that if there was a purchase service or a supply in one budget, we could indicate that the salaries were paid out of another. But I must have misheard that, because clearly what you're saying now is that they should be within the same budget to demonstrate the position and the supply and purchase service.
And the relative cost for it, right?
Thank you.
Sam,
let
I'm
me-
so sorry. We have about 5 minutes left and we have
Yep.
a question in the chat box. It might be a real quick one, Sam. It just says, where is the job aid located?
So as of right now, they're attached to this presentation or the WeHuva session. There's 3 different handouts that are attached to it that you can download for this. Other than that, I believe, and I could be misspeaking right now, that they are on our website, but I will have to double check that. I know that they were in Megs Plus. Nexus is one of the things that we're working on, is
They
getting
are,
attachments
Sam?
like that. So,
This is Patty. They are not on the website yet.
okay, well, there we go. So
They will
as of
be
right-
on the website before the applications go live.
Okay,
And Sam, if you shared them with Patrick, he will absolutely make sure that they're available on the website. And I'm sure he'll even email out.
Yeah, and sorry, not to create confusion. This is Erica. But actually they are on the website under the adult education funding page. I'm looking at right now under the state section 107 school aid, Patty. That's where the section where they are. So they weren't under the WIOA, but it's under the section 107.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to make you guys confused. I apologize.
No
Never
problem. We've had
confuse
some
us,
updates and
Patty.
changes.
Hey,
And then,
Renee, there's one more question. Let me throw that out. That's from Tammy about why are budgets so detailed? Why ask for narratives too? That's under the Q&A.
Thank
It's a
you.
requirement under federal guidelines that there has to be a pre-award and post-award, and the narrative is part of it and the budget is part of it. So as Sam mentioned earlier, they both paint a picture and they both tell us the same things. So the budget should relate to the activities that are written in the narrative. Plus we need to have other guidance on what type of students you're serving, those kind of plans. So based off of required guidelines, which is why we have to do that. Thanks and sorry.
Oh, no, thank you,
I
Sue.
have
I
a
missed that.
question,
Good thing there's
please.
2 eyes.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm an adult education teacher. My question is there a budget for teacher cell phones? And I will tell you what happened with me. I've been through several cell phones since February of 2020. I mean, my phones are exploding literally because I have to keep in touch with students in any way I can all the time. So is there a budget for teacher cell phones? I saw the navigator's cell phone. This is why I'm bringing it up.
so that would be a conversation with your adult ed director to try to work something into the budgets of stuff that's needed. So your adult ed director and your programs are the ones that control your budgets and allocate the costs appropriately to how it is that they feel best serves the needs of their program. So that would be something that you would have to work with them out to see if there's would be funding potentially available for an option like that.
Thank you.
And then there was more just a comment, not a question so much, just we find it hard to believe that no COVID aid was earmarked for any adult education program statewide.
I don't disagree with that statement.
This is Tammy Brown. I'll just chime in that we are working on an ARP request to try to get some funding through all the additional funds that are coming through the federal and state legislators. So we are working on an ask and we are getting some momentum in legislation, but there's nothing to date for sure.
Do
Thank
we
you,
have
Tammy.
any more questions? We have some really amazing people from the state on this Zoom right now. So do we have any more questions? I can't believe how many of them we have here. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah. Can I just say something? I had posted the comment about the COVID aid, and I'm just noticing this as just an overall general thing. I find it criminal that we are not given the same respect that K-12 teachers and K-12 programs are. And yes, it is criminal. I do say that word. I chose that word for a reason.
I think a lot of us would agree with you, Christian, myself included. But I do just want to take the time to really thank Sam and Sue and Erica and Patty and Brian and
Yes.
Sandy. And I can't believe how many of you came here today. It's kind of exciting for me too, because our own fiscal agents, Jason and Taria, are here. So it's like, oh my God, everybody, whoever deals with our budget is right here in one room together. And I am the cheery positive one, but I really just have to say, like, it is so easy as a second year director writing budgets for the first time to work with everyone here on this call. Our fiscal agents, Jason and Taria, are the most wonderful people, as are everybody at the state. Anytime I've had a question, it's been so easy to get help. And I just really want to thank you guys for being here, and thank you for being so helpful and willing to work with us. We are so happy to have you on our side.
Thank you.
Thanks,
We appreciate
Renee.
it.
So I think we're almost to lunchtime, right? At noon, everybody's gonna go have some good lunch, and we'll hope to see you back here. I think 12:30 is when our next session starts. My lights keep going off in my room. It's so annoying. Yes, our next session is from 12:30 to 1:30. So have a good lunch, everyone. I'm gonna eat something McDonald's and fat. So if you want to have your good healthy food, you go have fun with that. But thanks again for coming. If you have any questions, I'm sure you could email Sam and Sue. I'll say it again. They answer emails so fast. It's so awesome and easy to deal with them. So thanks so much, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording and end.